Speaker, it is a great honour today to rise and speak to Shannen's Dream motion, representing the great people of Timmins and the James Bay region where Shannen Kustashian was born. Today in Fort Albany is the great moon gathering where all the Cree communities are coming together, and tonight in Fort Albany I'd like to point out that the great band Tragically Hip is coming to perform in Fort Albany because of their recognition, because they've been inspired by the young people of the James Bay coast. Mr. Speaker, this is a historic moment in this Parliament, and I would say a historic moment for Canada. This is the first motion that I've known that has been driven by children. Yes. The reason we're debating this issue is because children across this country have recognized that their brothers and sisters are being denied basic education rights. That this is an issue about putting children first. And I cannot think of another instant where you could have school children in New Brunswick, school children in Nova Scotia, school children in Ontario, school children across Western Canada, who could tell every member of this Parliament about what Shannen's Dream means because they know this, they've been living this, because they've been inspired by the story of Shannen Kustashian. So this is a historic opportunity. I would say it's also extremely important for us as parliamentarians, for all the rock throwing that goes on in this House and all the blame that has happened, and this is our job, we fight with each other. But there are occasional moments when, as a nation, we are called to rise to something greater. That moment for me came when we all came, the ones who were members in the last Parliament, for the apology for what happened to the residential schools. And I remember standing in this House on that historic day and thinking, who is going to apologize to this generation of children? That question had remained unanswered. But today, perhaps, with the adoption of Shannen's Dream, not just the idea of Shannen's Dream, but the actual principles that have been articulated about the need to close funding gaps, the need to ensure that we get ring fencing around capital projects so we can start to build schools, the need to ensure that we have adequate teacher-student ratios, class size ratios, just like every other child in this country has. If we agree to that as parliamentarians, we are taking a historic step forward. And I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, the children are watching. I'd like to tell you a bit about Shannen Kustashian because George Strombolopoulos picked the 5 teenage girls in history who kicked butt. I know that's probably not a parliamentary expression, but George Strombo's words were a little even tougher. He picked Joan of Arc. He picked Anne Frank. He picked Mary Shelley. He picked Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I'm not sure why, but my kids say that's got a lot of street cred. And he picked #1 Shannen Kustashian. Bravo. That's an extraordinary effort for a child who came from the impoverished community of Attawapiskat. But I'd like to tell you, Mr. Speaker, Shannen did not want to make history. Well, she might have liked to make history, but she didn't set out to be a hero. She wanted to be on a volleyball team. She wanted to have a locker. She wanted to write notes in classroom. That's what Shannen wanted. She had a dream that she could have what she called a comfy school. You know, Mr. Speaker, one time I was walking with Shannen. We were in Cobalt, Ontario at Little St. Pat's Public Catholic School, tiny little school. It wouldn't even be on the radar of what you'd think would be a proper school today, but it has a nice, comfy little feel. And I was walking with Shannen, and she kept disappearing on me. And I went to look for her, and she was looking in a class window, and I said to her, "Is something wrong, Shannen?" She said, "I wish I had my entire life over so I could go to a school like this." That at the age of 13, she had realized that opportunity was slipping away from her that might never come back. And Mr. Speaker, when you see the sense of urgency through a child's eyes, the sense that if they don't get that education, they're never going to get out. They're never going to be better off. That is a deeply disturbing thing. And Mr. Speaker, we've known about the underfunding. We've known about the study after study that sat at Indian Affairs for years. We've known all about it. It just wasn't a priority. Nobody in this House actually thought that it was a priority. That children were suffering substandard education, that children were being treated in systemic discrimination based on their race and the fact that they lived on reserves. It was never a priority. Until one child said, enough. And when Shannen Kustashian stood up and started to fight, other children came with her. She has been called by so many young people across Canada as the Rosa Parks of this generation, the one who said, enough's enough. We don't want to spend another day sitting at the back of the school bus. So, Mr. Speaker, this can be about the blame game. This can be about the horror stories, the communities, the hundreds, some that have been mentioned, but I can tell you individual communities that I've gone to where children, how they can even get up and go to school in the morning and sit in those cold substandard classrooms, to me is a sign of real heroes. We could talk about all that. Or we could talk about how we're going to actually fulfill the obligation of this great nation. Because, you know, Mr. Speaker, every now and then I'll hear people say, oh, well, when's enough enough? When's enough that we've done our bit with First Nations? It's like, Mr. Speaker, we are on a path together. We are on a relationship together. It has been an abusive, dysfunctional relationship, but we will continue on this relationship together. And it's incumbent upon this House of Commons to stand today and say that we believe as Canadians a fundamental principle that every child has a right to an education. Every child has the right to guaranteed access to education. Mr. Speaker, a right to an education isn't just a school. A right to an education is a more fundamental principle. Children shouldn't even have to know what the right is. When they walk in that school, just like any child in Timmins or Red Deer or any other community in this country, their rights are encoded in law so that the class size ratios are guaranteed, so that if they have dyslexia or autism, that there's a plan for that child if they have special needs, because their child has only one childhood, Mr. Speaker. It is too precious a thing to waste. And under the bureaucratic indifference of successive governments, we have squandered the lives and potential of tens of thousands of wonderful young Aboriginal children who were never given what they could get. So, Mr. Speaker, what we're talking about today was Shannen's Dream motion. This is a motion that was born the day after Shannen's horrible death on May 31st, 2010 on Highway 11 just south of Temagami. I would say that was the worst day of my life, Mr. Speaker, when I found out that we had lost a youth leader. But people started to call me. National education leaders, national labor leaders, Cindy Blackstock, people who said we've got to carry this on. Young Chelsea Edwards from Attawapiskat called me. Her community was devastated. The whole James Bay was devastated that we had lost this young leader. And we said, we have to fulfill what Shannen started. And so the language of Shannen's Dream was crafted out of that tragedy, out of the sense of grief, that we sat down with the Assembly of First Nations, we sat down with the Canadian Public School Boards Associations, the trustees, the teachers, and we said, what are the steps that are necessary to guarantee that this generation of children will not be squandered? And so here we are, Mr. Speaker. 2 days later, Shannen would be 17 now. Shannen had a dream. I think she wanted to be a lawyer on some given days. I'm not sure what she wanted on other given days. But she wanted to get an education more than life itself. That was her passion and her belief. And she used to say to me, it wasn't about her anymore. It was about the younger brothers and sisters. And I think of those younger brothers and sisters in my communities, in Kashechewan, where we don't have a proper school, and Attawapiskat, where the kids are still waiting for a school. They're looking to this House of Commons. And this is a moment of unity, not just for the First Nation students, but for the non-Native children from across Canada who've reached out and said, if we work together, we can bring change. So here we are in this House of Commons. This is our moment. I'm calling upon all parliamentarians to say, this is our time. This is the way we apologize to what has been going on, and this is the way we move forward as a country. I'd like to see the support of every member in this House when we stand for Shannen's Dream. Thank you.